Steve Bannon, President Trump's former chief strategist, on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's landslide victory. Hello, Mr. Steve Bannon. Firstly, thank you so much for giving time to the Indian media. Today is the day of a landslide victory of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and I hope that you have heard this big news, coming from India. How do you look at as a advisor to President Donald Trump in US? How do you look at this emergence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a world leader? Affecting India and US relations?
Look, I think Modi is one of the most important leaders on the world stage, and I think that this landslide victory of his for a second term really puts him in a very special position, very special category. Through the good works of Shalli, we've been able to follow Modi since really the very early days. In fact, Shalli's the one that came to us and started talking about Modi as Ronald Reagan. I'm very proud of the fact that Breitbart News was the first news organization that really talked about Modi as the new Reagan. And this landslide victory was very analogous to Ronald Reagan's second term victory. It was the biggest landslide in American history. So I believe that this landslide victory is not just reinforcing Modi in Indian politics, but I think has now raised him to a whole nother stage in world politics, where people know that not only is he the head of India, one of the most powerful nations in the world, but that he's got the mandate from the Indian people to continue on with his policies and his practices.
Mr. Bannon, my second question is related to the successful, Donald Trump campaign in 2016, where Mr. Shalli Kumar, through his, organization RHC, have also contributed significantly in that campaign. You being the principal architect of Donald Trump campaign in 2016, how was your experience in having support from an organization like RSC, which actually focused on the Indian Americans, and to be precise, the Indian Hindu Americans in that particular election?
Well, I think, look, Shalli, in the states, and you were there, you saw it, but in the states that Trump won in the upper Midwest, which decided the presidency in 2016, and we won by essentially 75,000 votes in 5 counties. So it was a very tight win, big electoral college win, but very tight on the vote. And we had to do it perfectly. We had no margin for error. If we had not had Shalli and the Hindu Republican alliance, Trump wouldn't be president. I mean, every vote counted, and these individuals understood how to get votes out in those key Midwestern states. In fact, in late June of this year, in a couple of weeks, we're going to go to Chicago, to Illinois, to do a panel discussion all day on China, not put on by one of the groups I have, hosted by these guys, not as a campaign event, but just to get it out there for people to think about this new geostrategic relationship with China. That's the type of thing that has to happen for Trump to win again in 2020. So already Shalli and the Hindu Republican Alliance is already thinking ahead to the very difficult re-election campaign that President Trump is going to have.
So, considering the successful previous association with RSC, what expectation you have, and what strategies you would design for the 2020 elections? What role RSC can play in the upcoming elections for Mr. Donald Trump?
Look, I came in very late in the campaign in 16 because they were so far behind and they were losing so badly. I think they were like 10, 12, 14 points down with 88 days to go. It was basically over. Hillary Clinton wasn't even campaigning anymore. She was just raising money. One of the first things I did was reach out to Reince Priebus, reach out to people like Shalli. We had to bring the Republican Party on board. They had drifted away from Trump because of the way Trump was attacking certain, the Khan family and others. The Republican Party the reason his polling was so bad, it was many Republicans saying, hey, I'm either going to stay home, or even some were saying I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. We turned that around immediately by bringing everybody on board in one coalition to win. Look, I'm a populist and nationalist, and so is Trump. We're not traditional Republicans. but we brought traditional Republicans on board because we realized directionally we're all pointing in the same direction, although we have different differences among us, but not like the socialist and the cultural Marxists and the Democratic Party that's kind of been radicalized. So I think this campaign is going to be the exact same thing. We got to start bringing people on and put together that coalition that won again. I think the one significant difference is starting this summer and all through the year and next summer in the run-up, there's a whole landscape change, and that is the central issue of China. China now is starting to permeate every discussion, not Russia. Russia's a sideshow. What is permeating every discussion in the United States is the centrality of this ambitious plan of this radical cadre of the Chinese Communist Party that runs China, not the Chinese people. They're decent and hardworking as anybody, but I'm talking about a radical cadre that is, quite frankly, has an expansionist plan that cuts right through India. And so what's changed is the geopolitics. And although that was very important, although maybe not as bold as it is, in 2020, that issue is going to define the 2020 election. That election is going to be decided in the exact same 6 states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and maybe Minnesota. Those 6 states will decide the 2020 presidential election. Whoever wins them will be president of the United States. The only way we can do that is re-put together the coalition that we put together in 2020. The Hindu-Republican Alliance is central to that, and that's where we're going to get started with Shalli here in downtown Kazakhstan, but really go back to Illinois. That's going to be very important. But I will tell you, audience, this is going to be as tough or tougher than 2016.
So you mentioned about China, and I understand that you have also organized a committee, and Mr. Kumar is also part of that. What expectations you have from the Indian leadership, for this kind of global trade and economic scenario, especially with regards to U.S. and China?
Look, the ability to, first off, the United States is engaged now in this economic war. China's been running against Japan, the Europe, India, in the United States for 20, 25 years. But I think the 3 most important nations that are Japan with Abe, and which President Trump's en route to see even as we speak, right? And India with Modi. Modi won this campaign. He called himself the watchman. One of the reasons I think he's a watchman is between China, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka in the radicalization of the ISIS, caliphate. So, we're going very difficult times, very troubling times, but I think President Trump has a very clear game plan. I believe that India and Modi are going to be central to that, and that Modi is going to be one of the central leaders. And I think Modi is here in this time in history because India is one of the most powerful nations on earth and the world's largest democracy, and that's why it's so amazing this election you just went through. The world's largest democracy is partnership with the world's most powerful democracy, and that would be the United States. And it's very important that we make this work, and that's why I think it's a blessing for Modi to have won in the scale, in the style that he won in. But I got to tell you, we've got some very difficult years and decades ahead of us. People have looked the other way and let this situation with China metastasize, right? This radical cadre of President Xi, Wang Qishan, and others have gotten their way for a long time. The West has financed it. The corporations gave them the technology. We've essentially created a Frankenstein monster in Beijing. And it's going to be very difficult, this engagement with them, to turn this thing around. It can be, and it will be. The United States is not going to back off. Donald Trump's not going to back off, I don't think. And you're going to see that this is going to define the 2020 election. It's going to define really going forward, I think, in a much more intense than it was with the Soviet Union, given the scale of China and, quite frankly, the arrogance of Xi and Wang Qishan and others of these radical communists that run the Chinese Communist Party.
I think, Steve, he's asking a little slightly different question. Prime Minister Modi has stood up to China in that little skirmish.
Yes.
There was there.
A little dust up.
Right, a little dust up. But the question really here is to, in the effort to contain China and to make sure its predatory scheme does not prevail, and like you say, the cadre, the CCP does not prevail. So, what would your advice be to Modi and the Modi administration with respect to China?
Oh, I think it's to partner with the United States and Japan. I think that we have we have a commonality in purpose. We're democracies. Modi reports to the citizens of this country just like Donald Trump and Abe, right? The CCP do not. 1.4 billion people in China, and nobody owns any land. No land. It's all owned by the Chinese Communist Party. They don't really own the apartments. They don't really own the stocks. No ownership. So they're two radically different systems. You can see in One Belt, One Road, they've directly challenged India with One Belt, One Road. That is a direct challenge to India to try to tie in the Eurasian landmass.
Mr. Kumar, I have a question for you. Um, you being an economist and an analyst, and having a very strong flair of understanding towards economic trends, what, according to you, what exactly have contributed to Prime Minister Modi's, second term victory? And moving forward, another question I have for you is, moving forward, what strategy or what role do you think you can probably play, or your RHC can play for for the next upcoming U.S. elections?
Well, Fayaz, it's a very good question. In terms of the economy, this one of the promises of candidate Modi was to have a substantial economic growth, even though the economy is growing pretty good, but it's being called as the jobless growth. And one of the things which, with this now heavy mandate, Prime Minister has gotten, that he could concentrate more on job creation, on manufacturing jobs. India has prevailed well in software, and in software, but there are not that many jobs in software. It's limited. But in manufacturing, you know that I'm an electronics guy, so I can advise a lot more on manufacturing electronics and hardware. So there could be a lot more on Make in India, a lot more electronics manufactured there. In fact, there are certain parts which you could take out of China. If those parts, those products could be manufactured in India, then it serves both purposes. That is, we contain China, and as well as do more business with two democratically elected governments. So that's one part, and the second is when you say what will RSC be doing in the next election in the 2020. It will do the same thing as it did in 2016. Hold a lot of town halls, have a lot of campaigns, educate the people once more. The president has already made some major, let's say, has given a lot of good giveaways to, or not giveaways, I should say. He has, for example, on immigration, he has taken care of merit class immigrants. So he's making it more merit based. That should be pleasing the Hindu American voters, and lots of other things which he is doing. The president, and that gives him a positive for campaigning among the Hindu American audiences.
Now, I have one question for Mr. Bannon. Mr. Bannon, what would be your advice to President Trump, especially when he might be entering into the phase of the re-election scenario, in US? What would be your piece of advice for Mr. Trump to reach out to the Indian Americans or Indian Hindu Americans, especially when you have an organization like RSC? So what role do you think RSC can, contribute in the next upcoming elections?
Yeah, I think do what we did in 2016, partner with them early, and make sure that particularly I think that you and President Modi see eye to eye and are forming a strategic partnership. I think that's the most important thing, is that that India finally becomes a major ally to the United States and involved in essentially what we're working on. I think that's the key. I think the Indo-Pacific is going to be the central focus geopolitically for the next 50 years. And a partnership, an alliance between Japan, India, and the United States is something that is not just unbreakable, but something that will change history. So I would tell President Trump, in reaching out to Shalli and the other people, let them know that you're not just open to, but you are going to reach out and really work on putting together a really true close partnership between India and the United States.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I completely understand, and that's should be the way, that should be the way forward. And with Mr. Kumar's, as far as my understanding, with Mr. Kumar's strategic acumen, I definitely consider this association to go long term. And thank you so much, and wish you guys best of luck. Thank you so much for giving time to us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Fayaz.
Thank you, sir. Great interview.